Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. I welcome Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and the host of Opinion Journal each day at WSJ Live at 1 p.m. to my studio. And a very good evening to my colleague and co-host and friend. And Mary, we go immediately to Janet Yellen, now the chair of the Federal Reserve. Her remarks these last days proved exciting for the markets and affirming for those looking to the recovery in 2015. What I believe Ms. Yellen did is that she chose to say in future the word patient will no longer be part of the formula. Mary, how is it that we've come to a world where removing the word patient means that people get excited? Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening, John. It's great to be back with you. Well, this is the modern day equivalent of Kremlinology, because central banks have become very powerful, especially here in the United States, the world's most powerful central bank. The balance sheet is several $1 trillion. They're manipulating the markets. They've kept the price of money very, very low for a very long period of time. And that's very dangerous, as we know from history, because when you manipulate markets like that, it induces people to make all sorts of crazy decisions because they can't make money from keeping their cash in the bank. So they go out into the world and they try to find so-called yield. They try to find investments that are going to make them money. So now the markets are very, very focused on Ms. Yellen and what she's going to do in terms of increasing the price of money, increasing interest rates. The problem is that Ms. Yellen did the equivalent of a head fake. She said, well, we're not going to be patient anymore in raising interest rates, but don't worry, guys. We're not going to send markets off of a cliff. Well, this is very dangerous, John, because ultimately she should be making decisions based on the health of the economy. And it is absolutely undisputed that we are in a much better place today than we were 6 years ago when they put those zero interest rates into place.
So the word patient is no longer being used. They're no longer patient. But that means we've got a timeline here. James Freeman, you spoke to your assistant editor, the editorial page on this, and he mentioned the date September. Did I hear that correct?
That's correct.
September hike for a quarter point, a half point?
Something like that.
Something nominally. And then quit for the rest of the century, right? We're just going to do one cut. Right. And that's why the markets rallied, because it's not going to get worse?
Exactly, John.
It didn't make any sense to me then. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me now, except for the fact that the recovery remains in place, and I believe we're no longer speaking of the unemployment number being a bar to increasing the interest rate and strengthening the dollar.
John, we're in absolutely uncharted territory. The central bank has bought assets that it has never bought before.
Trillions of dollars.
The balance sheet is much bigger. They are making it up as they go along. Recall that a couple of years ago, the Fed said when unemployment hits 6.5, we're going to raise interest rates. Well, whoops. Right. Now unemployment is at 5.5, and they're saying, well, we're not going to be patient anymore. And the problem is that the United States is carrying a very big debt load. So what the Federal Reserve does has implications for that. The interest on all of that debt, which we can't afford to pay. It has implications for the value of the U.S. dollar, which is very strong right now and will get stronger if interest rates go up. It has implications for all of the other central banks all over the world that take their cues from the Federal Reserve. It has implications for investors, for savers. So going into these uncharted waters wasn't just a gamble going in. It's also going to be a gamble going out.
You also spoke this week, and this video of Mary's conversation with Mr. Freeman is available at the WSJ Live. You spoke with Starley Coleman, a senior policy advisor at the Goldwater Institute, and this follows up a conversation we had, I think, a week ago, Mary. These are the right to try laws. Starley Coleman was excited and pleased by the direction that the states are taking on right to try. What is right to try?
So right to try is the idea that states can pass a law giving terminally ill patients the ability to ask drug companies for access to experimental drugs that have passed phase 1 trials. So it doesn't guarantee that the patient is going to get the drug. It doesn't force the drug company to sell it. And it doesn't give these terminally ill patients access to any drug. It simply says we don't like what the FDA is doing, denying patients, terminally ill patients, mind you, not any patient, the right to try and save their own lives. But it raises a lot of questions and problems and moral conundrums for the drug companies. And that was a little bit of what Starley and I talked about today on the show.
We spoke of the Wall Street Journal editorial page moving in this direction, and I came to this story late. I don't see the resistance that must have been there. It must be being overcome state by state. Is that it?
Well,
or was the resistance at the FDA?
Interesting, because the FDA hasn't resisted yet. I think because they see vast bipartisan majorities in all of the states who are passing these laws. And these laws are going through in Democratic states like Virginia and in very, very Republican states. So from a political angle, it's hard for the bureaucrats to stand up and say, no, we hate this, because their political allies are all for it on the state level.
Let's move to politics straight up. You spoke to a colleague of yours, Colin Levy, in Chicago about 2 stories in Illinois. I'm watching Illinois carefully because Senator Kirk is up for re-election in 2016, and that's one of the 2 most vulnerable seats for the Republican Party and 2 major targets for the Democratic Party, the other being Mr. Johnson in Wisconsin. This wasn't about Senator Kirk. This was about Illinois politics, Chicago politics. Aaron Schock, a young and dynamic star, I guess, also a member of Congress, suddenly resigned. We were told there was an investigation. Seemed very marginal to the story of Mr. Schock recently. And then you showed a brief glimpse of the interior of his office. That was his congressional office that he had decorated in those odd colors?
Yes, so I love Downton Abbey. However, I don't love the idea that a member of Congress paid tens of thousands of dollars to decorate his office to look like Downton Abbey. And this was only one of several spending questions that had been raised initially by Politico. We should give credit where credit is due. They did some great reporting there. But Mr. Schock, there was not only questions about his office decoration, but his travel spending habits and other spending that he did with taxpayer dollars.
I questioned one of my sources on Schock. I didn't know very much about this story.
I had him on my show.
Schock?
Yes, a couple of times. They called me and said, we'd really love to come on Opinion Journal.
And?
Well, I was surprised. I thought, well, this fellow must be something of a self-promoter. He's very eager to come and do media. Even at the editorial page, I thought, okay, come on in. We'll see what you want to talk about. So you can go back in the archives. Those interviews are
Here's
there.
what I was told is that the Republican leadership found him a very worthy member.
He was a very pleasant guy when you met him.
I did get puzzled, though. You had a brief shot of him in the front of a men's magazine,
Men's
with
Health,
his shirt open.
Yes,
it seemed strange,
well,
as if he felt that he was a misfit in Congress. He was behaving in an odd fashion.
Well, there's more to that story that we won't get into here. However, my colleague Colin Levy, whom I was interviewing today, made, I thought, a good statement. She said he thought he was a movie star on the cover of magazines and flying on fancy jets and acting like a celebrity when actually he was a member of Congress serving the taxpayers. So that's what he should have been.
I think my memory of the Mark Twain story goes like this. That Twain was reluctant always when he went to receptions in Washington because he couldn't tell the servants from the congressman. I think that's the way he put it. Something about where to put his cigarette out, and he was always asking the wrong person. Finally, what we have, Mary, in these days in Congress is this apparent ceasefire between the two sides. I do not hear sharp words these days the way I did in the last Congress. And it points to the fact that almost all of the headlines are about Mr. Boehner and his own caucus. There's not this friction between the two sides in the House. And in the Senate, although there has been this filibuster recently and there is this confrontation over nominations, it doesn't seem acrimonious. Now, you see it from another point of view. You're doing the editorial page every morning. Do you believe the 114th Congress is as contentious as the 113th, or has there been an improvement of the weather?
I don't think there's all that much of an improvement, John. I think the Republicans are doing their very best to undermine themselves and shoot themselves in the foot by arguing amongst themselves.
That's in the House, yes.
Absolutely. And I'd point all of the listeners toward Kim Strassel's column. It's just up on WSJ.com about this filibuster that you're talking about. She gives
That's in the Senate.
In the Senate. She gives the GOP some very good advice that, by the way, they're now in the majority, and they would do well to remember that and start to act like it. So, good advice from Kim.
Mr. Schuck is resigning at the end of this month. Is that a Republican district?
Peoria is, yes.
Right. And so there's not likely a change of the party in Peoria.
Ray LaHood's son is reputed to run.
Mary Kissel, the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, as well as the host of Opinion Journal at WSJ Live. I'm John Batchelor.